Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is March 11, 2026. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Kathy Siegel Garcia for introducing me to today's guest, Brent Fischer. Where are you calling from, Brent?
I'm in Studio City, California, part of Los Angeles.
How cool. I had so much fun reviewing part one. We did May 6th last year. And so I wanted to start off with my brand new question. In 67, Mel Brooks released an amazing film called The Producers. Got nominated for an Oscar up against Battle of Algiers, Cassavetes' Faces in 2001, and it won. And I love the line that Mel wrote for the lead character, Gene Wilder, who was playing played Leo Bloom based on James Joyce's character. And Gene yells out in the middle of the film, "I want everything I've seen in the movies. Please fill in the blank. I want everything I..."
Oh, well, yeah. The best thing I could hope for, I want everything that will keep me healthy for a long and productive life because I probably need at least 25 to 30 years to do all of the rest of the stuff I want to do during my lifetime, and maybe even more than that because other things will pop up too, right?
High aspirations, my friend. You've done so much in your life. Let's just jump to that one. In your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Luck. So that's kind of sometimes being in the right place at the right time. Yes, something like that. I mean, was it lucky that I was born to an amazing producer, composer, arranger, and my father, Dr. Fischer, and that I chose not only to follow him into in his footsteps, but I thought to myself, I really like how he has differentiated himself from all the rest of the great composers that are out there. There's a lot of great music, but he has a recognizable stamp, and I can explain it very, very clearly for any of those people. If you think you have an audience that can go deeper than, let's say, lay understanding or lay person's understanding of music. But so I thought I wanted to continue in that same vein, and that's exactly what I've been doing, and I've been able to really enjoy it. So that was the luck part, is sort of being in the right place at the right time. I'm sorry, what's the second and third?
Oh, skill and ambition.
So skill, yes. I started. I would arrange at age 3. I would arrange Tinker Toy boxes, and then I'd take out a couple of Tinker Toys and start beating on them in time to music that was playing on my record player or on the radio. And so my father saw that, and he saw my musical interest, and he bought me a little, like a child's drum set when I was 5 years old. And all I did was putz around on it for a while. I had no idea what I was doing, 5 years of age. But then a friend of his came over and played a drum beat, do do dat, do do dat. And I thought, that's what they're doing. That's what I hear on the radio. Okay, now, and then from there, it just kind of mushroomed out. And I was a sort of a self-teacher, but I did, of course, take lessons on all of the various instruments that I ended up picking up throughout my life. And I consider myself a lifelong learner. So there's always something new that I feel like the more I know, the more I realize how much more there is to know. So skill, yes, that played a big part. I had some good teachers. Of course, my father wasn't necessarily a teacher. I didn't sit down with him, but I was always there from the time that he understood that I understood that in the old studios, when the red light goes on, that means don't make a sound because we're recording. And so I understood that around 6 or 7 years of age. So he brought me into the studio, and I would sit and watch the other musicians play. So that was a very comfortable environment for me by the time it was time for me to do my first recordings at age 16. So yeah, I joined the Professional Musicians Union at that age, and made some of my first recordings, and actually the first album that I ever worked on, which was for my father, because he was the one who really knew about my skills burgeoning and put me to work. And it was also fun for him because, being my father, he could tell me exactly what to do, and he knew that I had to do what he said because he was a disciplinarian, and I'm happy for that because it was a great way to develop my skills. And then I, went to university, got a degree in symphony percussion, and that's where I learned how to conduct and all these other things that I use in the music industry today. So luck, skill, and
Ambition.
ambition. Well, I don't know if it's ambition more than just wanting to, curiosity, maybe. I
Yeah.
mean, I was never one of those people. I would say when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, I had this idea that I would be famous, when I grew up. But then by the time I was 18 or 19 years old, and actually, I was even hanging out in the studio with my dad when I remember, all the artists that he worked for that I met, lots of celebrities from probably age 7, 8, 9 onwards. And I noticed that celebrities, yes, you get the adulation and the fame and the money, but there can also be a lot of problems associated with celebrityhood, and there are a large number of things that you have to deal with. So I kind of veered away from that idea of I want to become famous. I think more my ambition is to be well respected, and that scholars will study my music far into the future, because that just continues after I'm gone. It will always be there for people to listen to, and more importantly, the written music for people to look at, and people who know how to read music can study what I've written in great detail. And I've always said if a picture tells 1,000 words, then a music score with all the printed notes on it tells millions of words, because you get an insight into the writer's the inner workings of his psychology, soul, whatever you want to call it, his mentality, and his reasons. You can study the sonic architecture and learn from it. And for me, that's what I think would be the greatest thing that I can do. I also have altered those ambitions a little bit as I grew up. I was actually on the very first session I did, which was at Capitol Studios right down the street here in Hollywood. That very same session, we were done with the album, and I was talking with the drummer, and I said, I felt good about what I did, but I feel like there are also a few things I could have done a little bit better. But overall, I'm very happy with what I did. And he said, this stuff ain't going to cure cancer. And actually, stuff is not the word he used, but let's keep it PG for here. And then, okay, so I took that kind of at face value, but I always remembered it. And as I grew up and I saw people, first of all, thanking my father profusely for his art and the joy that is brought to them in their lives, and then celebrities that I was working with getting that same sort of adulation, and then finally later on, people emailing me or sending me a message through social media saying, "Dear Mr. Fischer, this song that you arranged or produced or whatever was a key turning point in my, getting out of depression, or it gave me the will to fight the cancer, and now I'm cancer free," or some of those things. So then I thought to myself, well, maybe there is more to it. Maybe this can cure cancer if it gives somebody the will to just push a little bit further. And of course, the combination of that with the medications and the procedures and everything else that they go through, kind of just so I consider that my contribution to civilization is to bring some kind of joy, and if I do it right, then it's joyful for people whether they understand anything about music or not. But I think for those who do, for those people who have really good ears and can analyze what I'm writing, they will get a second and in my mind exponentially higher level of joy by being able to, again, go through all the sonic architecture. I liken it for non-musicians to imagine if you're walking down the street and you see this beautiful building and you can appreciate its architecture. Maybe you don't know a thing about architecture. You don't even really know about geometry, but you can study the angles. You can look at how the building is put together, and you can really appreciate it. But then an engineer or an architect can go into that building and knock on the walls and think, oh, okay, that's a 3/4 inch plaster or whatever, this copper piping, and they can get into the structural details and understand why the building is built that way and how the support structures work. And so I think that's what I'm doing. That's part of what I'm doing musically, and that's I guess my big ambition. If you want to give the long version of an answer to your
Well,
very nice
really,
question.
you covered a lot and inspired a lot. When we talked about the function of music in part one, you said self-awareness, and I've been using that with musicians for a while now and asking them what do they think of that, and it's really a great term. And one of the other functions of music that comes up is healing force and a
Yeah.
healing energy. And I think your story about the drummer telling you that is such a good example of how it's a healing force. And my curiosity on the word ambition, because my question used to be not, prioritize those three: luck, skill, and ambition, because luck is great golfer said, the more you practice, the luckier you get. So my question used to be an ambition, just briefly, is your observations of ambition, because you've worked with so many greats and just normal people too, is ambition based more on fear or joy in general for your human observations?
For me, I don't think fear really places. I don't place any emphasis on fear at all. And as a matter of fact, I think the part that goes with luck is related to how you gauge your own ambitions. Because as lucky as I've been, and have all these again all these celebrities that I can point to as people that I've worked with over the decades, but then also a lot of great independent artists who their music is just as valid, but perhaps they just didn't have the funds to do the
Right.
incredible marketing that a
Yeah.
bigger organization can do. But so to go along with that is you have to kind of let things roll off,
Yeah.
and because you never know what's going to happen in the future. There have been lots of unlucky situations where I didn't get a gig, somebody else got it, or it just didn't work out. The biggest example of that I can think of is in 2003. Well, okay, let me back up a little bit. In the 1970s, my dad did an arrangement for what was then called the Jackson Five, when Michael Jackson was a little kid, and he was still singing the lead vocals, but it was the group. And my father did an arrangement for them, a song called "You Push Me Away" by the Jackson Five. That they liked that string arrangement so much that they incorporated one of the violin lines into their guitar parts. The guitarist redid the part to correspond with the string lines, and that has stayed a timeless classic for all these decades. And then in 2003, my father and I were asked to go meet with Michael Jackson about the possibility of doing an entire album of orchestral music. And so we went and we signed a non-disclosure agreement when we arrived at Neverland to his home at the time, and so I can't talk about the particulars, but I can say it was going to be a full orchestral album. Now, about I don't know, 3 weeks after that, a lot of unfortunate circumstances happened, and the project was canceled or put on hold. I mean, there are I couldn't get a straight answer out of people as to what was going to happen. And then, I tried to get that project back on track through about 2006, 2007. I would even talk to the producers and everybody about it, and it just never quite went. And then when Michael Jackson died in 2009, I thought to myself, okay, well, I guess this project is never going to happen. It'll never see the light of day, and that's too bad, but I just have to live with that. And then a few months after he died, Michael Jackson's estate contacted us, my father and I, and said, "We found this cassette tape. It's called, um, what is the name of it? Oh my, that's so funny when you have something on the tip of your tongue. This is it. That's what it was called. This is it by Michael Jackson." And he had written that song, and they recorded it onto cassette tape with just a piano player playing and Michael singing. And who knows when that was done, but if it was on cassette, it was probably in the early 90s, I would say, something like that. Never released. And so they decided they were going to release this, and that was going to be the title of the documentary that they released for him posthumously. And they asked my father and I to do the orchestral arrangement. And so we did. And my dad was very old and frail at the time, but I conducted the orchestra. I actually did the majority of the writing, but I had him as involved as he could be, and he was always useful, all the way up until the very end of his life. Even when he had mobility issues and all that stuff, he was always very useful in the studio, even if he was just sitting in the control room and listening and making an occasional comment. So we did this, and it was released, and then I think it was one of the most popular documentary films of that time period, the 2010s. And so there's a little bit of good luck and bad luck in there, but you just have to roll with it, I guess, because some things
Yeah.
aren't meant to be. Some movies, some book
Yeah.
deals never go through, and you can't base your self-worth on whether or not that project goes through.
Yeah, your bio and your dad's bio are amazing, and the beauty is there's a lot of integrity there, and the proof's in the pudding, dude. The music's unbelievable. I started
Thank
listening to your dad's early albums in the last couple days, where it's just a trio. And
Right.
you can see or hear right there why Herbie Hancock says, dude, I wouldn't be the great pianist I was unless I listened to Claire Fischer. And I'm like, what? And I mean,
Yep.
it's there. It's there. Amazing. But let's just stick on your dad for a second. And this is sort of a two-part question is I know it's both. It's called nature and nurture.
Yeah.
The fact that someone lives long, your dad lived into his 80s,
Yep.
is it a little more DNA or a little more lifestyle choice in your guess or choice opinion? I
Oh,
know
we
it's both, but do you think it's a little more either a DNA or lifestyle choice?
I mean, I think in his case, in my case, I think it was equal parts because the environment was there for me from the beginning. But in my father's case, his parents were amateur musicians, and they didn't do anything really professionally, except I think my father's mother played piano for silent movies at the local theater. So that must have been a great gig for pianists to just go in there and you just improvise a bunch of music to go with the picture, and you do it differently every time. Imagine you go to see a movie and
Yeah.
every time you see it, the music is slightly different. That must have been an amazing experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, they weren't professional. They didn't understand anything that my dad did. He would often say that he could come home, he would read through some Bach piano music for a little bit. So that was, 17th, 18th century. And then he would listen to a Stravinsky string quartet. And then after that, he'd listen to some Duke Ellington big band music.
Oh,
And so it was this incredible variety, and it was all equally unintelligible to his parents. They were just telling him, "Why do you have to listen to the same stuff over and over again all the time?" Because they had no understanding of it, and so that early experience of having him tell me that, and also hearing him tell that to people when I tell that, I'm telling that story right now. I tell it sometimes at seminars or when I'm giving music clinics somewhere. These this type of upbringing for him was definitely, he went out and did this all on his own and found he found his path, and was in charge of it. Whereas I started working for my dad when I was 15 years old,
yeah.
kind of in an assistant realm, and then professionally. It was starting with doing gigs and recordings when I was 16. And so we had 32 years working together until he passed. And yeah, it was, at the beginning it was assistant, and then towards, later on it was co-writer, then ghost writer, and finally he handed directorship of all of his ensembles over to me about 6 or 7 years before he passed, and I continue all those ensembles today, as well as directing my own. So I
I,
would feel that in his case, it was definitely the not the DNA. It was what he did with his life.
Yeah, it's amazing because you really carry on. I really recommend people going to both you and your dad's websites because you can buy Claire's music. You can get deeper into all this. And I had to tell you on a personal note, your dad was raised just miles from where I was raised. I was raised in Flint, Michigan, and he's in
Okay.
Durant. And
Yeah.
this is beautiful because I also love where you go. My influences are Duke Ellington and Isaac Hayes, and and Bach and Stravinsky. You go all over the place too, and it's beautiful. But here's a question, Brent, that I ask everybody in all my interviews. Two of my film heroes have the mantra. George Manupelli, who started the Ann Arbor Film Festival in Michigan over 60 years ago, his mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas in New York says there is no self-expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor said, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. And again, it's both. I know it's both. It's a stupid question, but just your inclination of is art making, music making more self-expression, or more you're a vehicle for whatever culture, technologies, and environments are dominant?
So if the vehicle is there, then it's just a question of are you in control of the vehicle? Did you design it the way you wanted it so that it functions properly and has all the features that you want? And I think this is a big part of where education and being a lifelong learner comes in, because I have the skills and the tools to go and be able to analyze something, and not only that, but to take something from one genre and use it in another genre for a completely different purpose. Because after all, a good idea is a good idea. Good creativity is valid regardless of genre. And so I've been able to do that. And I think that's another reason why there is, for people who get to know the music that I have written, there is an auditory stamp on it that differentiates me from a lot of other people out there. I think that really has to do with me actually designing the vehicle. I said, okay, I want to be able to do this, and I want to be able to think about this that way, because I may hear a Latin jazz tune and like an idea from it, and I'll end up using it in a funk song that I'm working on, or vice versa. I may get some of my best ideas for my straight ahead jazz or Latin jazz writing from, again, like a Stravinsky or a Shostakovich orchestral piece, just like my father did. You know, you listen to those, you get ideas, and then that creates a vocabulary. And I think the fact that I have this very large vocabulary, musically speaking, makes it so that not only can I come up with ideas more easily, but I don't really find myself being painted into a corner, like happened when I was a younger writer, and like I see happening with a lot of other people. There's a lot of this stigma about, you know, painting yourself into a corner. I think that really all has to do with vocabulary. And
Yeah.
there's an analogy that I use, and that is when you read a book by a really gifted author that really has a way with words, you will, you know, invariably you will run into some words that this author uses that you've forgotten or what they meant, or you never even knew this word existed. So you have to look it up. And but then once you understand what those words mean and you see the way the author has put the words together, you get these subtle shades of meaning that you wouldn't otherwise have using the standard vocabulary that is, you know, primarily in use every day, at least here in the English language. So, so having a big vocabulary really plays a big part in how ideas flow. And I like to think that now that I'm doing that with music, and the fact that I'm engaging a vocabulary that not a lot of other people engage with, is again part of the way that I differentiate what I do.
Really good, Brandon. Brought up McLuhan would check out the dictionary every day and learn 3 new words. And that's what it lead him to do, is saying, hey, my mission is to come up with new questions and new metaphors. And that's like seeing with new ideas. You're saying, the vehicle, are you in control of the vehicle? That is a beautiful thing. The follow-up, Brett, question is, can art making, music making be egoless?
Absolutely. One of my driving motivators is to be of service to the music.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing for some musicians that have big egos to deal with, because I'm asking them to put aside their ego to be in service to the music and the idea. And who decides what's in service to the music? Well, I would think the composer would be number one. The arranger should also be probably number two, and the producer number three, in that order. I don't think a lot of producers that don't arrange or compose would agree with me, but that's fine. You know, everybody has their own way of doing things. But yeah, when you put those ideas down, you know, there's a definite reason for everything. So I mean, this is yeah, this is just my philosophy, and it has, you know, it has meant sometimes that I would choose a less famous musician to work on a project.
Yeah.
That person may not put as many eyeballs on the album, but will give me exactly what I need to fulfill my creative vision at this, and at the same time, still, you know, it's not like this person is abandoning his ego
Yeah.
completely, or abandoning his, you know, any sense of musicality that is what gives him joy. It's just that we are forging a path that where the in a sense the song is the one that has the ego, and how can we boost that the best?
Yeah, you use Larry Coons, and I've seen Larry play for years in LA.
Oh yeah.
And he's not like this superstar Lee Ritenour or whoever, or Larry Carlton, but Coons is so good, and it's so sweet how that one video on YouTube really you feature him playing a solo. So I love what you said. The egoless question's amazing, Brent, because I ask people, can art making be egoless? 80% of people go, no. And, you know, they kind of wrapped up in that whole thing of analyzing words. They're probably thinking egotistical. But
Yeah.
one woman, after 40 years asking this question, one woman said, great art is egoless. And then another woman said, great art has got to be egoless. So just that you could say right after the question, absolutely, that is amazing. perception that you got going, and you're so articulate and concise. And the example I give often, I wanted to suss it out a little because, Cecil Taylor's an amazing pianist, as you know, but, most people listen to it and they go, what the heck was that? He's just banging at the piano. And, it is immense to me to even watch him on YouTube and see what he's doing, because he's like Jackson Pollock. He comes from a traditional background, but he learned how to take it a little farther. And so they asked, and I met through Kathy Siegel, Garcia Siegel, Ellen Burr, the flute player, and I talked to her yesterday about this, and she had some workshops with John Cage, and he said, oh, just listen to traffic noise, and then when the traffic noise stops, keep thinking about that as almost a musical composition. She didn't put in those words, but keep thinking about that. This other great composer I talked to in Germany says he grew up listening, putting his ear to the window of the car and hearing the sounds, and that's where he got this sense of sonic, musicality. And then they asked Ginger Baker, where did you get your drum sound? The Cream drummer. And he goes, I was in London when they were bombing. Boom, 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 boom. And they asked James Brown's drummer, you're the architect of funk drumming. Where'd you get your sound? He says, I was in Ohio, and one side of my house was a factory and the other side was a train track. So it's boom, boom, he got it from his environment. This from loving Duke Ellington, Take the A Train. That's where they heard at the A Train and embellished it. But my favorite was Missy Elliott. They go, where'd you learn how to sing? And she said, from car alarms, which is like, most Black people are like, we learn how to sing from the church. So right. That's exactly what I complex by the fact that your dad had this sense of Latin jazz or Latin music, and he's a white dude in Michigan, right? I looked up his heritage. There's no Latin in him, really. And then he's playing like a Black jazz pianist. I'm sorry if it sounds racist, but to me, I sent you my funk track, and we're called Black Shoe Polish because we outright admit Blacks play funk better than white people, so we're called Black Shoe Polish. And then Messiaen, it was the biggest influence on Anthony Jackson, who's like one of the greatest funk bass players of all time. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on that environmental kind of influence on your dad and you, because you both are like huge in this. Shaka Khan, George Duke, D'Angelo, Prince, 25 years you guys worked with Prince. You don't have to go, the YouTube videos go into all the details of that. My question is what is the roots of your dad having that? And you're saying you got Duke Ellington, Bach, and he's listening, whatever. Where did that come from for your dad?
Yeah, and I mean, once he got older, he would go to the clubs in Detroit, and those were segregated at that time, just after World War II was over. And but first of all, my dad was a big guy. He was built like a football player. I got my mother's body type, so I'm the little skinny guy, but he was a big guy, and he lifted weights, and so he knew how to take care of himself on the rough and tumble streets of Detroit in the 1940s and early 50s. And so he could go in to all the segregated clubs and make music with those guys. He would go to the Black clubs, and then he would go to the Latino clubs. And wow. If there were any people that gave him trouble, not only could he handle himself physically, probably against 2 or 3 guys at the same time, but if they didn't like him, whatever race mixing, he also knew who secretly had interracial relationships going on. Who had the secret girlfriend or boyfriend that was the wrong race. So he could just tell this guy that was giving him trouble, hey, how's your girlfriend? and then he would totally back up. Okay, let's get out of here, guys. And they would stop bothering him. So he learned a lot from working in that environment. Then he had college roommates who were, I believe, from Puerto Rico and Venezuela,
Oh,
and they
wow.
brought their records with them, right? So yeah, and I mean, when you want to talk about like a racial mix of, or is there anything genetic to this? I mean, yeah, my father, the closest my father got to being Latin is actually just that he's part French. So
Right.
now then I'm the one who has the mestizo, Mexican American grandmother. So I am actually a quarter
Oh,
Latino. And I had somebody tell me once, a Latino guy tell me, um, now that I understand that you're a quarter Mexican Indian actually, or whatever you want to call it, mestizo, which is the blend of that. Those were Spaniards who intermarried with the local indigenous population. So he said, now that I understand that you're a quarter Latino, that tells me why you're so good at playing Latin music. And
that
I
is
was I was a little put off by that because I thought, well, then how do you explain my father being so good at Latin music? And he said, well, that must have been a past life thing or something. And so I disagree completely. I
yeah,
think I
yeah,
think it was the environment that my father was in,
environment.
listening to all
Yeah,
that Latin music, got interested, went down to South America in the early 60s, was one of the first Americans to bring bossa nova and samba music from Brazil back to the US and start playing. You can see there's this great YouTube clip called an old TV show called Frankly Jazz, where you can hear my dad in like 1961, 1962, before I was even born, playing this brand new Brazilian music that everybody grows up with these days. But that was a novel idea for everybody back then. So I think
yeah,
that was his upbringing, and then I think that probably the reason why the two of us have ended up working for so many R&B artists over the years, and some gospel artists besides the jazz artists and the
yeah,
Latin stuff, is the fact that there is that relationship between the development of jazz and
yeah,
R&B music and gospel music, because they have a lot of ideas in common,
yeah,
and a lot of that is based from what the original people that started this whole thing, I guess about 110 years ago, maybe in the 1910s. So they were listening to Ravel and Debussy, and they sort of took these ideas and blended them into jazz, and then that branched off into R&B and gospel, and that's where we have it now. In my case, I got even further than that, because as a teenager, having that ability I didn't realize it at the time, but what I was doing was I was unlearning what I knew as an American musician. I was, in effect, ignoring my university education at the time so that I could hear music through the ears of the local musicians who came from that country or that region or that ethnic group. And in that way, I could figure out how to play effectively in their grooves. And that's the most important point. You can learn the notes, but if you don't have the groove in that style, it's not going to, it's not. I mean, Duke Ellington had his famous song, "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing." But here's the thing. When you're playing Latin music, for example, that's not swing. That's not swung notes. Those are straight notes, right? So in this case, it don't mean a thing if it's got that swing. And that's a hard part for jazz musicians to understand. Guys that grow up playing jazz swing music, and then all of a sudden they got to play Latin, and it's really straight metrical notes, and that's a hard concept for some of them to grasp. And so there's all that went into that made me be able to sort of shift gears to groove with musicians from another country. That led me to getting discovered by a lot of other ethnic groups, which had trouble finding they had large ethnic enclaves here in Los Angeles, but they had trouble finding bass players because that was my main instrument after I switched over from drums at age 14. So it was very easy for me to go in and play with a Greek group, Armenian, Persian, Filipino, Korean, whatever, a ska group from Jamaica, whatever those situations were that came along where somebody said, "Hey, I heard you're great at learning ethnic styles," and I would say, "Yeah, throw it at me. Let me just let me hear all the music, and I will pick it up, and I may ask you a lot of questions along the way." And learn about sort of the cultural manifestations behind the music, behind why ideas sort of percolate the way they do in those styles. And so that gave me the ability to basically tour around the world for decades, working with bands that were famous in other countries, or maybe they were based here in Los Angeles, but there was a is it diaspora or diaspora uh,
Yes. Yeah.
of of that ethnic group that was in cities all over the world. And when I say all over the world, primarily when you're talking about Greek, Armenian, Persian, Egyptian, all that stuff, you're talking about people who are living in the Europe, in Europe, in the U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So I haven't done extensive touring in Asia, just a little bit, but yeah. So I went to a lot of different countries and got to take part in listening to musics that a lot of Americans, or let's say a lot of people who are not of these ethnic groups, don't even realize it exists.
Yeah.
I mean, Greeks and Turks may know about each other's music because they're right next door. Armenians and Persians, they're right next door to each other, so they may be aware of each other's music. But there are very few, let's say, like Greeks that are really into Brazilian music. So,
Yeah.
they
It's
they
like
have a different way. Yeah.
It's like Brent, when the Tuba Throat Singers came to LA via Richard Feynman, they ended up jamming in Zappa's house with the chieftains from Ireland and Johnny Guitar Watson. So he knew how to mix that soup up. But do you know Duke Ellington and Marshall McLuhan had correspondence with each other? So there's a lot of crossover. Really quick, because I have a question that goes right what you were saying, but I wanted just to interject really quick. The
Yeah.
Mexican American grandmother's on your mom's side or your dad's side?
Yeah. He's on my mom's side.
Mom's side. That's what I thought. And then your dad's college, his college roommates. What college was that?
Uh, Michigan State University.
Oh, MSU. That's right. I did
In
read that.
East
That's
Lansing. Yeah,
East
East Lansing,
Lansing.
yeah.
Yes, I know. So here's the question, and we might have covered this in part one, but it's so appropriate now. I usually ask people, how does one acquire taste? You learn that my friend says the three T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. So you learn how to play the instrument, you learn how the structure is, and then you acquire taste, usually from listening and exposure. But the follow-up, you might have covered this, but the follow-up goes right with what you were saying. McLuhan said song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference.
Lyrics.
So that's it. You've covered this, that covered the world with your musical uh spreading out of hearing it all. Is knowing that cultures have different musical taste, do you think it's connected to their language difference?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the rhythm of the spoken language dictates how the lyrics will unfold, and that
Yeah.
dictates the type of groove that they're going to have.
Yeah.
That's why it is very interesting when one can take lyrics from one language and incorporate it into a completely different style. I can give you a great example of that. My dad took the traditional Japanese song Sakura, which has to do with cherry blossoms in April in Japan. He took those lyrics, which are ancient. I don't know when they were written, 17th, 18th century, and he put that into a Brazilian themed song. and
Wow.
with the use and using harmonies from great Russian and Eastern European composers like Bartok and Alban Berg and Shostakovich. That's where the harmonies come from. So this is like, it's possible in many cases, but I've also seen it done the wrong way. So yes, acquiring a taste for what is creative. Really, I think that's, if people can sort of develop their taste to seek out
Yeah.
creativity,
Yeah.
that's where we can end up escaping from what is happening right now in music and in art in general.
Yeah.
And that is, there is a glut of mediocrity out there.
Yeah.
So that there is so much mediocre music, and everybody's all worried about AI learning how to write like them. Um, Honestly, I feel that AI is learning from the mediocrity that exists not just in music but in all the arts and the written language in every single language, and they're helping to they're participating in the dumbing down of civilization across the planet. And
Yeah.
so when people realize that, and they go towards the curiosity, a curiosity element which seeks out the creatively different, and in some cases that has to do with finding things that are more complex than the general art situation or language situation, whatever it has to do with. In other cases, it can be actually something that is simpler. But in none of those will it be something where something that is mediocre actually becomes worldwide famous and well known. No matter how many good marketers you throw behind it, if something just doesn't have uh, artistic quality, and
Yeah.
that's a very subjective issue.
Yeah.
That's a very subjective issue. So,
But Brent,
yeah,
really, you're so articulate and so fun. I really appreciate your time and energy here because I worked for Frank Zappa for 10 years, and I was really fortunate because his big thing was you can't have progress without deviation. But
right.
most people are like, wait a minute, don't deviate. You got to have the norm. And so he touched on something you touched on really in his book that's beautiful. I don't know if you know this, but it's really, he was a teenage, Catholic kid watching the candles in church. And as the choir sang, the flames would move. So it
Right.
led him to believe that music is air molecule sculptures. So when you were talking about structure, I thought that is exactly what Frank was learning at the same age, you were learning in your teenage years. And so let's go into time. This is Frank Zappa. It is unnatural to play in 4/4. You don't speak in 4/4. Brent, why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music?
Yeah, I mean, that is, again, that's something that developed from the language, but also because the simplicity makes it more accessible. And that's really the issue. Not that there isn't a lot of great complexity in
Yeah,
the 4/4 time signature, but it really has to do with the development of the language. Now,
yeah,
one of my teachers on drums was Joe Porcaro, and he's the father of the guys who formed Toto, Jeff,
yeah,
Steve, and
yeah,
oh, I forgot the third brother's
yeah,
name. Um,
yeah.
but in any case, and I used to go over to Joe's house for my drum lessons. Sometimes my father would go over, then he'd give a lesson to Steve Porcaro. So we had a great time doing that
Yeah.
in those early days. And the one thing that Joe told me about 2 months before he died, I saw him at Emil Richards' memorial service,
Oh my.
which was right before COVID hit. So actually, Joe never got a proper memorial service because he passed away in April of 2020. But when I saw Joe in February of 2020. He was 90 years old at the time. He said, Brent, you know, my book on odd time signatures for the drum set, out of all my students over the decades, you are the only student, Brent, to finish that book. And
Wow.
and I told him that's because I don't look at those time signatures as being odd. Just
Right.
because they are just because they are asymmetrical doesn't mean that they aren't valid. You know, I mean, yeah, again, so you asked my, you know, did I get the Latino part of my heritage from my mother's side? Yes, that's half of it. The other
Yeah.
half is Greek. So imagining this Greek
Oh,
guy taking a boat all the way to Los Angeles and meeting my Mexican American grandmother who was working in a movie theater in, I don't know what, 1918 or something like that. And they fell in love and had my mother, and here I am, you know, thankfully. But in Greek music, they have a lot of phrasing in 5, 7, 9, 11, you know, all of the supposedly or so-called odd time signatures. Well, they're not odd to them at all. They're completely natural. Little kids who are 5 years old are sitting and dancing to these asymmetrical time signatures, and they have no problems at all because they were born and raised with it. And I have loved to listen to, you know, because growing up being a drummer, when I'm sitting there at the drum set and you know, working out all the ideas, yeah, the most interesting part for me, of course, were the things that were not symmetrical, because everybody is
yeah.
doing the symmetrical stuff. But that doesn't mean that I want to dwell on it. I just
Yeah.
love the idea that we don't have to think of that as being odd or unusual. It can
Yeah.
be normal.
Yeah. It's so well put, Brent. I really appreciate this because here's what people say, and I've read the research. Why 4/4 time most commonly used? Besides being intuitive and easy, you said simple, accessible. It might
Yeah.
be because it's in sync with walking and marching. So, you know, Wayne Pete said we have two arms and two legs, and it's in sync with our heartbeat. So just there, is is our heartbeat in 4/4 time? What time signature is our heartbeat in? Can you even name it?
Yeah. So if a heartbeat is going bump, 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 yes, that is a duple meter. So that fits into 2, 4, 8, you know, any of those time signatures. If you have one of those heartbeats that goes bump, 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 that's 6/8, because you have that's a triple meter. You've got you know, the I'm sorry, I'm not a medical guy. The valve
Yeah,
opening, that's one. The valve closing is two, and then there's a break in between. Bump, bump, break, bump, bump, break, bump, bump, break, bump, bump, break. So, so that break gives it that triple, that triple feeling. And so yeah, I think some people's heart rates are duple and others are triple, and then
yeah,
everything else can be built from that.
yeah. Here's Captain Beefheart. You know, Captain Beefheart's drummer, John Drumbo French, really changed rock drumming in so many ways. And it's because Don had this sensibility. Don Van Fleet is Captain Beefheart's name. He said he wanted to vary from the mama heartbeat, that same old 4/4 rhythm, because it's related to fascism. It's so fixative, so hypnotic, so synthesized to where it's dangerous to the heart. Faster than the heart disco is dangerous. Captain Beefheart wanted non hypnotic music to break up the canatonic state. Any thoughts on any of that, what he said?
Well, and, you know, it's no accident that when you open up a music writing software of any kind, where you're not dealing with writing music notes, you're just maybe playing notes into a keyboard and it's recording it and then it's playing it back for you. Generally speaking, all of those programs which people who don't write music use to create music, the default setting for the BPM is 120, or basically twice the normal resting heart rate. So that's kind of all related. Um, on the other hand, I don't think we can read too much into that because I know some guys who can play incredibly slowly and incredibly quickly, and they have just as much soul and energy and enthusiasm that they're putting into it. So, yeah, is it abnormal if your heart rate is 65 that you're playing a song with BPM 78? I don't think so at all. It's for me, it would be natural.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to diss 4/4 time. Now, every time signature is a time signature. It doesn't mean it's good or bad, but I
It's
like
part
what
of the
Don's.
vocabulary.
Yeah, and I think Don was amazing because he changed rock and roll music forever, because people go, you mean you could play that instead of 4/4 in the normal rock setting? And so that goes along with you saying at one of your interviews, they're so articulate online, so many on YouTube. You say music is part math, part science, and part art. Now that
Yeah.
it was perfect lead in. I says, this guy's got ESP. He knows exactly where my questions are going. So here's the two let's stay on math for a second.
Yeah.
Thelonious Monk. All musicians are subconsciously mathematicians. Then
Absolutely.
Gottfried Leibniz described music as, quote, a hidden arithmetic exercise of the soul, which does not know that it's counting. I
Yes.
can't even figure out what he's saying. So any thoughts on those two
Oh,
quotes in regard to music as math?
yeah, that makes absolute sense to me because when you're okay, I was drawn to drumming because of its rhythmic base, which is dealing with numbers intuitively, right? And
Yeah.
then I was driven to complex music like orchestral, like symphony music, because again, this incredible sonic architecture that's based completely on numbers, and then when I got into high school, I realized that my interest in math really was an interest in arithmetic because I had no love for geometry or algebra. When it came to addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, those are what I use every single day when I'm writing music, and I'm doing it intuitively. I'm not thinking about things so much, except for a time when I have to place structure around something. Like if I need to speed up the music during one section to be exactly 1/3 faster, I'm going to do some calculation at that point, and that's deliberate calculation. But the rest of it is completely intuitive. And my father, actually, one of his Latino roommates in college, was a math major, and he told he saw these insane calculations that this guy was writing all over this chalkboard and spending hours agonizing over and then finally solving. And my dad looked at him and said, I can't see how you could possibly understand this. And he said, well, I can't figure out how you deal with math intuitively with all those compositions that you're writing. So it's like each one of them had respect without being able to really grasp what the other person was doing. And actually, my father, for all of his rhythmic sophistication, was not very good at arithmetic. And he would often come to me as kind of like a human calculator when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, before calculators were, before there were laptop computers and cell phones that you could add things on, or ask Google what's 25 times 6 or something like that. Before that, I was basically this human calculator that he could ask me, what's 140 minus 60, because he was frazzled by math and he just didn't want, he thought, okay, it's easier to ask my son. So yeah, I don't think mathematical ability is a necessity for making music because it's done intuitively. But I think even those people who are not good at math, so to speak, actually deal with it again intuitively in their life all the time. You do it when you drive a car.
Amazing, Brent. This is so cool that you said music is part math, science, and art. So I have all these questions about science and art. What is the difference between art and science? And is there even a difference between art and science?
Oh yeah, I mean, part of what I do in the music industry is as a consultant, and I will help independent artists who are, trying to build their brand and their career in the music industry, and they don't have the benefit of having, a big record company behind them. And I will help actually even artists who do have a nice organization built behind them, but don't quite understand this or that aspect of the music industry. And one of the things that where I think, yeah, you put art and science together is when you're running a some kind of a marketing campaign, because you have to, in my case, I always create the art first and then figure out how to market it, right? I don't I don't write a song or write an arrangement with the idea that this has to be a hit because otherwise I'm going to lose my record contract. Um, but I know a lot of people do have to think that way, and that's fine. But for those people that find that they have made something and they've thought about that first, fulfill the creative vision, but then now how do we sell the public on it? Or in the case of like the Emmy Awards, the Oscar Awards, the Grammys, all those, the Golden Globes and stuff. How do you get those people who are voting on it to know about it? Because it's kind of like running for city council. You have thousands of people that want these 5 seats. Those are the nominees, and the general public just doesn't care about it. Because it's not a governor election or a mayor or something like that. They want to know. They don't want to be bothered with it. So it's very difficult. So part of it is understanding the science behind statistics and how the public perceives things. So there's that science element there, but then there's also this art where you're dealing with people's emotions and what's going on in their life. How do you get through to them? And I think marketers deal with that all the time. How are we going to reach out to people emotionally based on whatever the audience that we're trying to capture? And so that's where art and science work together, because art is not exact. Science is very exact. In a sense, it's a very finite thing. If you do something statistically a certain way and you look at the previous statistics, then you are honing how something will function for you. But then when you have to estimate, when you have to figure out, okay, well, we have two choices here. We can do this or that, and the statistics show this or that. What are we going to choose? That's where the art part comes in, because you have to deal with the emotional element at that point, and you have to sort of estimate, and that's very inexact. And so those are those two items coexisting, the exact part and the inexact part.
It's
At least for
amazing.
me.
Yeah, very good. Because Michael Pollan's just on this campaign with this new book about how consciousness has always thought it came from the brain. And now we're saying, no, it comes from feeling. So again, it's both. And it's got that resonating interval between the two poles, maybe. But here's a couple quotes on science. And I'm curious if you want to expand or any thoughts on any of them. The first one is Jean Cocteau. Art
Oh,
is science. He said,
yeah.
art is science made clear."
I like that. Yeah, that makes absolute sense to me,
Yeah,
because you have to go through that process to create the art. You have to deal with all these elements for the creation of the art. Because again, that's why I talk about sonic architecture. We're
yeah,
not just letting stuff flow out. I think no matter what people say, an idea in your head doesn't just spark out of nothing. And that's why
yeah,
I think it's interesting that people say that, well, music and art can't evolve, it can only change. No, I disagree with that, because as you are creating art in this year, you have the entire history before you from which to draw upon to base how your art manifests itself. And that is a type of evolution. And when when you look back at music, almost all of the styles that developed were a rebellion against what had become
Yeah.
the nature of things. So there contrapuntal music evolved in the 16th century in church music so that individual choir members would have their specific voices to add at certain times. There was rebellion against that in classical music. No, let's play all at the
Yeah.
same time. Let's have this really rigid structure and conformity. And then romantic music came along and say, okay, we need to get a little more complex now. We need to put more emphasis on emotion and feeling. And then out of that evolved jazz, which was kind of like a simplification or a rebellion against the complexities of all this orchestral. We don't need a 50-piece orchestra. Let's just have 18 people in a big band, or 15 people in a smaller ensemble. And then rock evolved from that, or evolved, sort of promulgated from that sort of
Yeah.
rebellious nature of, we don't like what's going on here. We're going to do something completely different. And then all the styles that have come after
Yeah.
that were just sort of a rebellion against rock music. And
That's like when Ornette went to New York and Miles and Mingus freaked out, and Ornette changed it forever. So this is you have ESP, Brent, because you use that word history. And here's Marshall McLuhan. When we push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science.
interesting. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you really want to analyze the history, if you want to analyze the history and build upon it, then yes, there is again an element of science and an element of art and mathematics that goes into it. And of course, also being able to speak a language helps. I think if you look at music from around the world, from cultures that were, I don't know, like Neanderthal, or I don't even know if Neanderthal had music of any kind. I'm not a scientist. I'm no expert in that region. But I know that once language evolved, once this ability to communicate evolved, you could then exchange ideas a lot more easily. And that led to all of those techniques for instrument building that happened, starting, well, all we know is that it kind of started with the Egyptians, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. There could have been a group of people 7,000 years ago or 15,000 years ago that created something incredible technology, but we don't know about it because there's no record of it at this point.
Yeah. I have this wild ass theory that I love to say because I learned about biomimicry from Carolyn Casey, Coyote Network News. And she said, the person who invented Velcro saw it in a plant and goes, oh, I can make that what I see in nature. And so, Messiaen would listen to the birds and write music inspired by birdsong. And then they asked Eric Dolphy right here in LA and Sun Ra, where'd you get your sound? And they go, we listen to the crickets and the birds. And my theory is, who can disprove this? Well, maybe humans started whistling and then the birds heard us and go, well, we can do what those humans are doing.
Well, I think parrots do that. Actually, they
and then there's the proof. The parrots do that. But it's not like who's first is so important, but it's to open up the brain to think there's many possibilities.
I had a friend say to me once, we were working together while I was getting over a cold or something, and so I was sneezing a lot, I was coughing a lot, and he said, Brent, did you ever think about this? When you cough or sneeze, it's in time. You actually create a rhythm with your coughing and sneezing. And said, are you conscious of that? And I said, no, I guess I'm used to playing in time. I'm used to playing with good rhythm. So maybe my coughs and sneezes are not going to be sort of random rhythmically. They're going to be more structured rhythmically.
Wow. And
I never even noticed that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Here's Chomsky. We learn more about ourselves from literature than from science.
Sure. Why not? Or
Yeah.
there could be scientific literature.
Well, there's a twist in there too. So here's one. McLuhan said that James Joyce had solved numerous problems which science had not yet formulated. And I'm
Hmm.
not sure if you're aware of Tony Conrad. He helped find Velvet Underground, but he's also an amazing experimental filmmaker. And he said artists break rules that haven't even been made yet.
Hmm. Sure.
So this whole thing of, creating, its effects precede causes in a way. So let's go to Albert Einstein. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science.
And that's absolutely true. I live that basically because every time something is just appears in my life that is creatively unusual, it immediately piques my curiosity, and I have to find out more about it.
Yeah.
And that can be an amazing thing that I don't know. Maybe I'll be going through my dad's record collection, and I'll find something from 1973, and then I'll look it up online and find a lot about this stuff and maybe an artist that I never knew about, or a concept in music that I never knew about. And of course, when I do that later in life, I'm kind of sad that I never had a chance to discuss it with my father while he was alive. But
Yeah.
I have the comfort of knowing that we had discussions for almost 50 years together. So we had plenty of great discussions. I mean, there was no lack of it. Even when I was touring around the world and away from home for 2-3 months at a time, we would always check in with each other, and we always got a chance. And then we would catch up. We'd catch up when I got back into town. So and then I started building tours for his groups. And I became his manager, and then we were actually touring on the road together, and that was a great experience to be able to share that that father-son bond in all that element, and again, because we were in another country, to be able to discover something artistically that maybe people in this region have no idea about, and we were fortunate enough to have experienced it in our lifetimes.
Yeah. My wife's a pro jazz singer, and she did shows at the Typhoon restaurant in Santa
Yeah.
Monica, right next to the airport. And I love that we can really see you conducting one of your bands there at the Typhoon, because they had that huge stage. That was beautiful. The last comment on science I wanted to bring up was a French historian said, "Science finds no truths. It discovers unknown facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways."
Sure. Sure. There are so many ways to get information about something, and then you show it to three people and they form three completely different ideas about what you meant. And that's where, again, like being able to play music, for me to be able to play music with people from other countries who maybe don't speak English, but we can go on stage and communicate together with our instruments. Even though I can't, if I want to communicate with that guy linguistically, I'm going to need somebody to translate for us. But when we go on stage, there's that understanding that and even if we're approaching music very differently, there are a lot of commonalities between all these different ways of making music all over the world, especially now, as as the internet makes basically everything in history available to anyone anywhere.
Yeah. Brent, we got about 15 more minutes. I really appreciate this. I'm almost would love to do a part 3. That's what I'm doing with Vinny Golia, because we're just scratching the surface on this music thing. And here's my theme on silence. Debussy said music is the space between the notes. And Miles loved to say that too. Thelonious Monk says silence is the loudest sound in the universe. how do you know when not to play? You're composing a piece, writing a piece. How do you know when to have silence? And as a player, bass player, marimba, drums, all your instruments, how do you know when not to play and incorporate silence? Or not so much how do you know, but what guides you and informs you on incorporating silence?
Yeah, and that's completely different for everybody based on part of it can be based on ego. There can be guys who really want to show, maybe they have a lot to say musically because they are incredibly talented, and their ego won't let them leave too much silence in there. And so you can get, like very, very busy guitar solos or whatever. And that stuff is all great. But as I've gotten older, I have learned more how to appreciate leaving space or how to let the music breathe. And I can remember a specific example where a lot of the ghostwriting that I did for my father would be later on in his life, and we actually have we have a music room where we would be able to rehearse with all the ensembles. It was a large room, so we could fit a lot of people in there, and there was a hospital bed in the corner where my dad would lay. And he would listen, and every once in a while, if something really got to him, he would sit up and he would make a comment about it. But otherwise, he was just sitting there listening and enjoying. And that would also happen while I was writing music because there was a keyboard in that room, and I would write at that keyboard. And oftentimes, my dad would be lying in that bed, and we would have these great conversations together while I was working out parts, or I would find something. I was working out an idea musically, and finally, when I would get to the end of it, and I wasn't sure whether he was even awake or not because he was completely silent and still, he would exclaim, "Oh yes," because he liked the way my idea turned out. But there was also another time when I was writing at the keyboard, and I was writing some ideas for this arrangement, and that was supposed to have his name on it. And eventually they gave us both credit. After we recorded the music, and they told us how much they liked it. I told us that I'd also had a lot of input into that, and they agreed to put both of our names on the credits. So, but during that writing, I had come up with an idea that I guess was a little bit too busy for my father, and he said that's too much because I was playing back the band and listening to what was going on with the rhythm section, the singer, everything like that. And my dad said that's too much for that part. And so I figured out a way to sort of prune, to sort of remove some leaves from the tree and just sort of make it a little what do you want to call it? It's not more silence, but just, yeah, giving room for the music to breathe, for the ideas to breathe, phrasing. And so that's something that I guess I can appreciate more now when I'm a little bit older. I don't want to say more mature because I don't really know that the two go hand in hand. But when I was younger, and especially when I was playing bass in some of these groups that I was traveling around the world with, and there was a celebrity of some kind. May not have been a celebrity in the U.S., but it was a celebrity in their home country. And here they are with all these adoring fans. And I'm thinking to myself while I'm playing on stage, I could be standing here naked and nobody would even notice because they're completely focused on the celebrity that's singing these beautiful lyrics in their language. And I don't even really, I've had the lyrics translated for me while we were in rehearsal so I can understand, what each song is about. But I'm not focusing on that part. I'm focusing on the music part. And as a young man, I came up with this idea. Well, why don't I just play whatever I wanted? So I would get these really busy and do lots of fills. And I knew that my part was mixed in the background. The engineer at the front, he was not going to put me very loud. So I had this sort of flexibility. I'm standing next to my bass amp so I can hear myself really clearly. The drummer can hear me because invariably I was next to him. And I just throw all this crazy, really busy stuff in and, try out all these new techniques. Um, And most of the time, the drummers who were also, at the time, other young guys, they were like, "Whoa, that's insane, man! How'd you come up with that idea?" And so we had a lot of fun actually not incorporating silence into our music.
Yeah.
That came later, and part of it actually is, as you get older and your tendons get a little worn out, you need to incorporate some silence in there so that you can just, give your hands a break. There was even a performance that I did recently where, towards the end of the show, so, the leader, leaned over to me and he said, "Do you want a solo on this one?" And I said, "Man, my hands are shredded. I'm sorry." And I had already done some solos that night, so I felt like
Yeah.
I had said what I had to say.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm just going to respectfully sit this one out. And he appreciated that.
Yeah. It's
So I
amazing.
think that's, yeah,
There's been really good. There's been this increase because all these guitarists, all these new young guitarists, in my generation, it started with John McLaughlin, Intermounting Flame. And then Yngwie came out in the metal scene and goes, "We already heard John McLaughlin do this." And Yngwie was Kevin from Paganini. So we've always had a lot of notes, but it's like the blues, in my opinion, taught us, could you have a little space between the notes, please? And
yeah,
you listen to Freddie King or Albert King or BB, that stuff is so powerful because they know how not to overplay. So it's
yeah.
an amazing thing. Did technology speed up? And in fact, are we just reflecting the culture in the technologies and speeding up? But there is still that. So Roscoe Mitchell, who played with Art Ensemble of Chicago, his line is, "Silence is perfect." Any thoughts on that?
Again, that just has to go with being in service to the music.
Yeah.
And silence is necessarily a part of that. So if you're truly in service to the music, to the creative structure that has been delineated by someone, and you're going to remain true to that, then yes, incorporating silence in there with everything else that you're doing is of the utmost importance. Absolutely.
Here's Bob Dylan. Experience teaches that silence terrifies the most.
Hmm. Well, if you're talking about something like radio silence, or what people used to call airwave silence, where, you know, well, like this in an interview situation where somebody asks a question and you don't have an answer, and you have to
Yeah.
sit and think, and it takes you too long to think about it, and there's that uncomfortable silence there. I think that can happen on stage too. That can happen when you're talking to the audience. A lot of times, as a band leader, if I'm performing with the band and I'm acting as a band leader and the MC, and I'm also reading music, I've got to set up my charts on the music stand while I am talking to the audience, and hopefully, getting a little humor in there so I can keep them engaged, and just in general keeping the movement flowing, right? And so I think that can really be scary to some artists. I think I have a little more now. I'm a little more at peace with the idea that you can take a second on stage, and it's all right to do that. And not everybody needs to be thrilled every second. So I don't know if I don't know how that would manifest itself for somebody who is sort of being on stage for their first time. I've never been a person to suffer from stage fright. I think because I was put on stages from a very young age. When you're talking about playing in the school talent show at age 6 or something like that,
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about that. But I guess for those people who get nervous on stage, silence can be maddening,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's for a second or two.
Yeah. It's amazing because in my podcast notes, I say to people, silence is okay. And sometimes I ask a question and they literally stare. And I'm like, I've already told them silence is okay. and I sort of freeze up, and I'm just letting it. And I know most listeners or viewers are going, "Oh my God, my computer froze." They freak out. That's why Dylan's comment is it terrifies. Two more on silence. A Wee Wee, the Chinese artist. For me, silence is music.
Well, I guess there can, if you're talking about absolute silence, like if you were floating in outer space, no, skip that because you're in a suit, you're in a space suit, you can hear yourself breathing. If you're in one of those rooms where all of the all of the sound from the outside is completely blocked off, I mean, you can never have 100% silence. You will always hear something. As a matter of fact, because I have, throughout the decades, ever since I was a young kid, I've been wearing earplugs and professionally made earplugs when I perform. And my
Wow.
motto is safe music, always wear protection. And
Wow.
that has really helped me in my life because I still have reasonably good hearing now. And so that means that when I'm lying in bed at night, yes, I can hear not only my breath, sometimes I can hear my heart beating just by the blood flowing in my skull, whatever's near what is it, my eardrums.
How
I
did
can
you
I can
know?
sense that.
How did you know to do that, Brent? To use
Oh, because
earplugs?
I had hearing damage when I was like 15 or 16 years old. I started getting heavy tinnitus, that ringing in the ears, because I was playing drums really loudly, and
Oh, so
and
you knew right
fortunately,
off the bat. You cut it early.
yeah, I had a friend whose father was an audiologist and made custom made earplugs that fit the shape of your ear and defeat your ear's natural amplification ability. And so by wearing those, I was able to reverse a lot of the damage that I had sustained at age 15 or 16. And yeah, thank goodness it happened early because now I've been wearing them ever since, and I feel like it has really helped, and I recommend all people do that. Anytime you're going to a concert over 80, 85 decibels, which is pretty much any concert anywhere,
Annie,
unless it's like a string quartet or something like that, you should protect your hearing so that you can
you
still
should.
listen to it later on.
I wish
That's,
every
you know what? You just gave me an idea because that whole idea of silence, okay? Let's just massage that idea a little bit because there's this idea that if you are really to experience music in its full force, you must be listening to it loudly. And I couldn't disagree with that more. I can get such great joy from listening to music at very low levels. And for me, I don't need to have that music, shaking my bones. I need to have it stimulating my neurons to process and
exactly
analyze.
that volume isn't the dominant. See, that's what rock did that failed. That made volume the dominant. I mean, the British rock gods all just played black American blues guys and they turned it up loud. That's why, so, and then they had Tom Snyder has that great interview with the Grateful Dead. And he asked Jerry Garcia, did playing rock music affect your hearing? And Jerry goes, what?
There you go.
So here's one more, Brett. This is Thomas Carlyle. Speech is of time, silence is of eternity.
I can relate to that a little bit. I mean, yes, but there is silence in between your sentences if you're putting your thoughts together.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I mean well, that brings us to what hopefully I am doing if I make music that is relevant to today, but also uh, takes into account the history of all that in that in that specific style that has gone on before it, or not that specific style, but those creative constructs that I put together that I'm using in this particular piece that I'm working on. So if I do it correctly, it's relevant for today, but it also will be able to keep with the listener so that hopefully it becomes a classic of some type in the future. And that's, that's truly another big ambition of mine, is to have my music be timeless.
Yes, that's a beautiful thing. And that's a high aspiration. And my aspiration is we could do a part 3 somewhere like 6 months down the road, because there's so much more. I think me and you should do a seminar at the Hammer on music, McLuhan as music, because look at Marshall had this relationship with Duke Ellington. And he brings up these things like your thing about taste and culture, and you can expound on this stuff so well, and it really can bring the normal kind of jazz, classical, rock listener, funk, R&B to a commonality in learning. It's called the media literacy or musicality, music literacy. And see, because like in part 3, I'd love to go on the timeless thing, but just audience relationship. Like there's the music, there's the artist, and then there's the audience. There's a lot to talk about in there. And I'd love to go into your playings with George Duke and Chaka Khan. I mean, you talk about D'Angelo and Prince all over the internet, but I want to get into some of these other things too. So Brett, what a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much. You're so dang articulate and concise, and your music is a reflection of that. You can do both. Not all artists can do their art and talk about it. You're not required to do that. Some people are just artists and they let their art talk for themselves. But I'm curious also, your dad, was he as articulate? I'm not asking you this now, but was he as articulate in talking about music as you were or you are? And did you develop that because he was such a great companion with your career over 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, you can listen to some radio interviews that he did. Those are available online, and see for yourself. But yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
See for yourself. Brent, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and energy and all your music. And even though I'm
My
going to hit
pleasure.
the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Thank you
Thank
so much.